And regarding the audio, due to the volume of participants we have joining us today, we will be muting all incoming audio.
The conference has been muted.
That means we will not be able to hear you speak. That being said, if you have questions throughout the presentation, you can go to the bottom left corner of your screen right here. It's circled to your left, and you can submit questions there. At the end of the presentation, our presenter will have the time to address a few of the submitted questions. The questions will only be seen by the presenters and will remain anonymous. And finally, the information in this online seminar is for educational and information purposes only. Now, with all that being said, I have the great privilege to introduce our presenter today, Dane Jensen. He's the CEO of Prevailing Coaching, Inc. Dane is an expert on strategy and leadership and a furious cross-pollinator between the podium and boardroom. As the CEO, he advises other CEOs and senior leaders in both sport and business, and he is a regular contributor to the Globe and Mail on topics of strategy and leadership. Now, Performance Coaching is a partner organization with Medcan Coaching. Dane's extensive global experience includes work across North America, Asia, and Europe, and he's worked in industries from financial services to industrial manufacturing, from small businesses to Fortune 100 companies, with CEOs and frontline managers. And we've already had the privilege to talk about all of his interesting experience, and I hope that he will be able to share some of that today. He has trained and mentored groups around the world, including Denmark, the UK, France, China, India, Brazil, and Kenya. And in addition to his corporate work, Dane also works to enhance the competitiveness of Canadian athletes in international competition, most recently the Olympics. He works extensively with the board and executive team at the Canadian Paralympic Committee and with the executive team at Canadian Sport Institute of Ontario, as well as supporting Right to Play, where he adapts the Coaching for High Performance program to meet the needs of 15,000 volunteer coaches. Wow. All right, Dane, I have a great pleasure. I'm going to pass the microphone over to you. We're going to focus on what we can expect today. So that's our agenda. And here are your contact details.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Tanya. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be with you guys here today for the next 40 minutes. We're going to talk about how we can relate some of the skills that we've learned working in a couple different high-performance arenas to workplace health initiatives, and in particular, the kind of core element of workplace health initiatives, which at the end of the day is getting people to unlock or unfreeze themselves from existing behaviors and move to new behaviors, behaviors that support our health and wellness goals. So we're going to start by talking about the process that people go through to undertake behavior change. We're going to talk about some of the kind of common wisdom about how we support people through that process and why it might not be as wise as we think it is. And then we're going to move through an approach that I think gives us a little bit of a better hit rate as we think about supporting people in making some of the changes that are healthy and support their wellness. So let's talk about where the stuff I'm going to cover today actually comes from. As Tanya mentioned, I run an interesting little organization called Performance Coaching. And Performance Coaching sits at the intersection of two very different high-performance worlds. On the one hand, we spend a lot of time working in the world of elite sport, and in particular with Olympic and Paralympic athletes and coaches. We've had the privilege of working with over 70 Olympic medalists going back 25 years, and as Tanya mentioned, I do a lot of work myself with the Paralympic Committee. But of course, we also do a ton of work, in fact, most of our work in the corporate domain. And for for 25 years, we've worked with over 30,000 leaders. We work with 9 out of 10 most profitable companies. And really what I see our job as an organization is to kind of sit back at the intersection of these two high-performance worlds and say, there are things that are very different, of course, between Olympic sport and organizational life. I mean, you and I are not going out there and trying to win gold medals. But there are also some things that are fundamentally quite similar across these two worlds, things that, like the laws of physics, kind of apply regardless of whether you are an elite athlete or you are just an individual who is trying to perform to your potential. Things that are similar whether you are an athletic coach at the elite level or you are a manager in an organization who is trying to support those around you in developing themselves to their full potential and becoming fully engaged in work and life. And so what we're going to talk about today is what are some of those kind of fundamental performance concepts that apply not just to elite athletes and elite coaches, but can also help us all think about supporting behavior in ways that are beneficial. Where I want to start is I want to start by talking about the 4 stages of awareness. And this is really kind of a mental map for thinking about when people are asked to change behavior, how do they kind of move through that process? And often we kind of think of awareness as a little bit of a binary thing, right? You're either unaware or you are aware. The reality is awareness is a little bit more nuanced than that. There really are 4 stages of awareness when it comes to high performance or performance in general. Now, of course, the first stage of awareness at the top left is really a total lack of awareness, and this is unconscious incompetence. And of course, this is where we all start. This is, I don't even know that I'm not doing something I should. One example of this is asbestos. For years, we insulated houses with asbestos, and it wasn't because we wanted people to get cancer. It was because we just literally didn't know that it was bad for people. That's unconscious incompetence. Now, once we have some information, we move to conscious incompetence. And conscious incompetence essentially says, I know I should do something, but. All right, I know I should get to the gym 3 days a week, but. I know I should eat better, but. I know I should get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, but. This is where we have the information, but for whatever reason, we don't act on it. We had a hockey coach that we used to work with a number of years back, and she always had a great way of talking about this with her players. They would start saying, yeah, I know I should practice today, but, and she would cut them off and say, no. Stay left of your butt, right? Stay left of your butt. And once you stay left of your butt, that is, once you get to take some action, you make a commitment, that's when you jump across that barrier there and you get to conscious competence. And conscious competence says, yes, I have information and I act on it, but it's not necessarily habitual or automatic at this point yet. It requires attention, right? It requires attentive practice. We have to be actively aware. And so this is a relatively uncomfortable position for most adults to be in. And this is really where we're asking them to be a lot of the time when we're working on workplace wellness and health initiatives, is to move into this conscious competent space where it still takes effort, it still takes attention, and it's a bit of a vulnerable position. It's quite easy to backslide because it's very uncomfortable for people to stay there. But if we stay there long enough, if we get our attentive practice in, eventually we then move to unconscious competence, which is characterized by automatic expertise. And this is when things really do become habitual. We don't really have to think about them anymore. They become routine. And ultimately, that, of course, is the goal for any of these initiatives, is to get people to shift their routines and move back into unconscious competence. Most of us live our lives today predominantly in unconscious competence. We have routines that we go through. We don't have to think about it too much. It doesn't require that much attention. Sometimes you kind of end up in your driveway on the way home from work, and you're like, how the heck did I get here, right? You have no memory of turning left, turning right. It's automatic for you. And that's what it feels like to kind of be in that unconscious competence phase. So when we think about, the prevailing kind of assumptions around workplace wellness, when we kind of think about, well, how do we help people move through this journey from unconscious incompetence, like I literally don't know what I should be doing, I don't know that what I'm doing isn't, good for my health and wellness, all the way through to I'm so good at this, it's just habitual for me. It's just kind of the way I live my life. There are kind of 2 things that have emerged as the kind of prevailing tools or the prevailing levers that most organizations and frankly most individuals turn to kind of support this journey. And so I want to talk a little bit about these 2 things. The first is we tend to think, what's blocking people, the reason that they're not moving towards automatic expertise or even conscious competence is they don't have data. They don't really understand how bad it is, right? They don't really know the impact that their behaviors are having on their health and on their performance. And the second thing that we often try to solve for is we kind of attribute it to a lack of expertise. So even if they do know, they have the baseline, they go, I'm not living the way that I necessarily want to, my body composition isn't where I want it to be, they don't necessarily have the expertise to actually take action on that data. And these 2 kind of prevailing diagnoses drive 2, relatively predictable patterns of behavior. The first is that, there is a huge push to give people better data. So this takes the form of giving people Fitbits or other wearables, so people can track their steps, they can get a sense of the level of activity, the level of sleep that they're getting. Or maybe at a higher level, they come into Medcan, right, and they go into the bod pod here, and they get a really clear sense of where is my body composition and how does that stack up to where I want to be, relative to my stage of life, gender, all that kind of good stuff. So that's one way that we kind of try to help people move through that barrier. The second way is we go, you know what, the other thing people really need is they need expertise. How do I act on this? And so there are, aside from the Time article on getting fitter faster, there are whole genres of magazines that are entirely dedicated to giving people this expertise, such as it is, right? New ways to work out, new ways to think about structuring their routines, to vary things, to get their workouts in. Or at the higher end, we say, you know what, you need a personal trainer. They're going to set you up. They're going to get a routine that works for you. They're going to explain how to make this stuff work for you. So, these are two things that are very, very common features of pretty much every workplace wellness initiative, whether it's we establish a leaderboard, we give everybody Fitbits, or we put them with materials and expertise on, how do you work out and what should you be doing. And this is great, and it works for some people who are incredibly intrinsically motivated and who really all they need is that data and that expertise, and they can run with it, they can get motivated, they can move it. The challenge is it doesn't work for everybody. And so if we go back to this notion of the 4 stages of awareness, what we know is getting over that barrier in the middle that exists between awareness and action is not always or even usually about providing people with more information. So giving people Fitbits, giving them articles, all you're really doing at that point is moving people from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. You're saying now you know where you're at, and now you have the information you need to take action on it. But information typically doesn't change people. It doesn't change behavior. If information changed people, who would smoke, right? Everybody would eat healthy. Everybody would exercise. We all have the information we need to make those decisions. And so the first thing we want to look at is, in addition to information, which is great in terms of moving people from 1 to 2, how do we think about helping people move over that barrier between having the information and actually acting on the information? And, in the world that I spend a lot of my time in, which is leadership development, there's a whole body of research on the difference between what's called motivation to learn and motivation to transfer. Because when you run workshops, webinars, or seminars for a living, most people are very motivated to learn. Most people are relatively intellectually curious. If you put new information in front of them, if you present them with new concepts, they're going to be excited about it. They're going to want to learn about it. What the research has shown us, however, is that motivation to learn and tapping into the motivation to learn is very different than tapping into the motivation to transfer, to actually take the stuff that they've learned and apply it back in their real lives. And most workshops, most leadership development initiatives only have about a 10% transfer rate because people don't fundamentally understand the difference between that motivation to learn and motivation to transfer. So that kind of gets us to the first key when it comes to workplace health initiatives, and that is really, actually taking the time to diagnose what is the barrier for people, right? What is the thing that is actually stopping them from translating information to action? And we say the key here is take the time to diagnose before writing a prescription. And I use the analogy of a physician because, when you are in the medical sphere, right, if you walked into a doctor's office and, before you even got a word out, they tore off a prescription and handed it to you, how committed are you going to be to taking those pills? Not at all. You want a doctor who actually sits down and understands your symptoms and listens to you before you are likely to get committed to taking action. And so we want to try to do the same thing when it comes to getting people to do other behavior changes. We want to actually diagnose because then people are much more likely to get committed to taking the action that follows. And when it comes to this diagnostic, what we want to understand is that barrier that exists between information and action is going to be very unique depending on the individual. I love this quote from Dr. Paul Batalden, which is, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. I think it's a great way of explaining people's lives. Your life is perfectly set up right now to get the results that you are currently getting right now. And most of our lives are set up in a way that is very integrated, that is very interlinked. So if you look at these gears here, let's say one of them is work, one of them is family, one of them is your health, one of them is, community and giving back. Often we try to change the direction of one of those gears in isolation. So we go, I'm really going to focus on my health, right? We get the Fitbit, we get the information on how I should be tailoring my workouts. But guess what? If you try to reverse the direction of one of those gears, it's going to get stripped. It's going to end up moving in the same direction it was moving before because everything else is still chugging along, right? The system hasn't fundamentally changed. And especially when we are looking at high performers, high performers' lives are full. It's not like there are big chunks of free time where you go, you know what, I want to start getting 3 30-minute workouts in this week. Oh, great, right? Just take 90 minutes of your free time and dedicate it to getting your workouts in. It's going to have to come somewhere. It's either going to come from work, it's going to come from your family, or it's going to come from your sleep. That's basically it. Those are the 3 buckets. And so, when it comes to actually diagnosing what is stopping people, we have to move outside of that one gear that is health to say, let's take a holistic view of what are the different components of the barriers to action. Now, if you want to think about this in a very simple way, there's really only 2 places the barriers can lie. One is you as an individual, right? What are the things that are blocking you from making the change? And there are certain things that are internal barriers, which we'll get into in a sec. And the other is the environment, whether that's work, family, or community, the way that the external environment is set up to kind of support your life as it exists today. And so let's just take a look at some examples here. We've talked about lack of data. We've talked about lack of expertise. What are some other things that actually could be blocking people, that could form the barrier? Well, when we go internal, when we say things that block individuals, these tend to be things about our personality or our tendencies. So, for example, someone might be so overconfident that they feel they can just make this change anytime they want. They go, you know what, I know I should work out. I know I should eat better. Right now, it's all about work for me. Don't worry about it, right? When I hit 40, I'm going to do it. No problem, right? I'm a disciplined person. So that could be a block, right? That's actually, I'm a pretty overconfident guy. When I stop working out, that tends to be it for me. I go, you know what, 6 months, no problem. Like, I'll get back on the horse in September. Second thing that could be blocking them could be, their strength, right? They tend to be really good at problem solving, but they're not really high on action. They're not big on the details. So they have great ideas about what to do. They conceptually understand it. They have a great plan, but they never actually slow down to map out how is this going to integrate in my life and what are the conversations I'm going to have with my spouse or with my boss in order to actually make this thing work. Or, maybe they're impulsive. They love to have fun. These changes don't sound like a lot of fun. They tend to not focus on stuff that's not going to be interesting, not going to be exciting. The counterpoint to that is you may have somebody who is actually so disciplined that they have done this before, and every time they try to do it, they overdo it, and so they end up with overuse injuries, or they get so whole hog into it that it's either like all or nothing for them, right? And just like the doctor who has to wait to diagnose before they prescribe, you can imagine the plan for getting over the barrier is going to be very different if your issue is, I'm so overconfident that I think I can do it any time versus, I'm really impulsive and I love to have fun. Very different plans are going to have to be made if one of those people is going to get supported over the barrier versus the other. Now, of course, sometimes the barriers aren't internal, they're actually external. So, a very common one is, they work long hours. They don't want to steal any additional time from their spouses or kids. They really can't see a way to fit all this stuff in without taking additional time away from their family, and they don't want to do it. This is a real block. This came out of a real coaching session, right? Their spouse does most of the cooking, and they are worried that trying to influence healthier eating habits will be perceived as criticism. Literally the person said, I don't know how to have this conversation with my partner. I don't want it to come off as if I'm saying, you need to change the way you're cooking. Like, I really appreciate that they do all the cooking. That could be a very real block to making, some healthier eating changes. Their child's in a daycare that charges for late pickup by the minute, right? Many of you on the phone right now probably are in this situation, right? Daycares can be crazy about it. You are here at 4:30 or it's, $1 a minute. And if that's the case for you, that might be a very real block to go into the gym for 30 minutes after work because there's actually a financial cost associated with it. Or, maybe a combination of an internal and external block, right? So the individual is extroverted. That's an individual personality trait. So they love being with others. And it just so happens that their peer group, the people that they socialize with, tend to socialize around food or drink. And so, their external network combined with their internal propensities or personality actually sets up kind of a social block that makes it much harder for them to embrace eating habits. And so all of this is to say, it's not that one of these blocks is more common or another one is more common, but that really we need to take time to actually understand what is behind a lack of motivation to transfer. What is behind that barrier? What are the components of that barrier before we can start to actually think through how are we really going to up our success rate in supporting people in terms of making the changes that they want to make, right? That they have the information around. And so one way certainly to do this is by providing people with a chance to self-reflect, right? If a lot of the barriers are going to be internal, we actually want to provide people with opportunities to be introspective. And so, there are many assessment tools out there. I'm sure most of you in your organizations have some kind of personality or behavioral assessment that you're using with your leadership population. That can be a huge asset in terms of having these kind of conversations around, what is it about you as an individual that is likely to help you and likely to hinder you when it comes to taking health information and translating it into action. The one that we really believe in and we use in our partnership here with Medcan is the TAIS assessment, which is the Attentional and Interpersonal Style Inventory. And this is a tool that was actually originally developed by Robert Nidifer, a sports psychologist out of California, for use with Olympic athletes. And we still use it with Olympic athletes and Olympic teams to help them understand what are their tendencies when they are put under pressure. And it was so helpful for athletes that they ended up broadening it for use with Navy SEALs initially and then to the broader corporate population. And so when it comes to the things that we just talked about, such as are you somebody who is better with the big picture but you have a tough time to get anything down to details, the TAIS can be really helpful there. How you process information, do you like a busy world or can you only focus on one or two things at once? Do you make quick decisions? Do you need time to make decisions? Are you extroverted? Are you introverted? All of this can be great fodder for a conversation around what is likely to block you, and therefore, what do we actually want to focus on when we're thinking about putting a plan together. And really the goal of all of this, at the end of this whole kind of diagnostic phase, really what we're then saying is, as Lao Tse said, 2,000 years ago, what's in the way is the way, right? Once we identify the block, that's where we start to focus our attention. If the block is ultimately that, I feel like I can't get my workouts in without stealing time from my family and kids, it's not going to help if I get a Fitbit. It's not going to help if I get an article on, the 5 new ways I should be working out my abs. What's going to help is I actually need to figure out a way to work out without stealing time from my kids and my family. And so that's where we start to work. That's where we start to go. Now, you might think at this point we're going to immediately go, okay, so how do we solve for that, right? If that's the preventing challenge, or the prevailing challenge, how do we actually start to act on that? And we do want to get there, but I think the second way that we kind of missed the boat here is we jump straight to how, and we don't actually pause and think about who. And so the second key that we want to talk about is that who is important as how. Who is as important as what and how. And, when you look at the research into motivation to transfer, certainly when it comes to changing behavior around leadership and workplace behaviors, the two things that are most important, and this is a specific kind of change, are is your manager pulling the new behavior through, and do you have the support of a peer group to make the changes that you want to make? Now, when it comes to making health changes, it's a little bit different. And I want to use an analogy that comes from our work in sport. And this is a really interesting piece of research that was done originally by Own the Podium. And Own the Podium is a Canadian high-performance sport organization that has essentially taken the tools of data analytics out of the corporate world and said, let's apply those tools to funding in sport so that we can use the tools of data analytics to maximize the return that we get on the investment that Canadians are making in sport. And it basically got ramped up when we won the Vancouver Games, when we won the bid for the Vancouver Games, because to that point we had hosted the Games twice, Montreal and Calgary, and we had the distinction of being the only country that had ever hosted an Olympic Games and not won a gold medal on home soil. And we were so good at it that we actually did it twice. Nobody else had ever done it once. And so when we won Vancouver, Own the Podium was essentially created to say, okay, this is not going to happen a third time. And one of the data points that they looked at very early on was what they called the conversion rate. And the conversion rate essentially says, if you are an athlete who finishes top 5 in the world the year before an Olympic Games, like at a World Cup or a World Championships, what percentage of those athletes actually convert that to an Olympic medal, to a top 3 finish the following year? And when Own the Podium did their initial research, what they found was that Canadian athletes were converting at a rate of around 26%. Now, just to put that in context, Germany was converting in the 90s, and the Americans in Salt Lake City in 2002 converted at 104%. More athletes won Olympic medals than had finished top 5 in the world the year before. Now, when you think about this, you go, okay, well, if we have the physical abilities, if the athletes have the ability and the skill to finish top 5 in the year before, but they can't get it out in the Olympics the year later, the issue can only really lie in one place. It's not a physical thing, right? It's about how do you do it, how do you execute when the pressure is high. And so what this led to in Canada was really a renaissance in the discipline of sports psychology or mental performance, and a lot more investment, targeted investment in the area of sports psychology. Our organization was founded by Peter Jensen, a guy with a PhD in sports psychology. We have a couple of other folks with graduate degrees in sports psych on our team. This is a great discipline for helping people perform under pressure. But how this links back to the who point is what this meant was that On the Podium started making investments in a very different kind of expertise, in a very different kind of individual that would support athletes. And so if you look at the integrated support team, which is kind of this core concept in elite sport, it says, as an athlete, I am paired with a coach. We anchor the integrated support team, but we pull together a network of people that are going to bring the expertise and bring what we need to address the specific goals that I'm trying to accomplish as an athlete. All of a sudden, for Canadian athletes, the mental performance consultant, these people with expertise in sports psychology, became a critical part of that integrated support team because the diagnostic work had been done up front to say, what is the block here? Where does the block really lie? And that was then translated into what is the support team that is going to allow us to address that block for this individual athlete. Now, the reason that I spend so much time on that story and on that metaphor is because I firmly believe that one of the most valuable things an individual can do that is trying to change their behavior is once they have diagnosed the block, before they immediately move to action, they have to think, okay, who needs to be involved? Who do I need to have as my integrated support team if I am really going to tackle this block head on and make the health changes that I want to make? And again, just like the athletes we looked at with On the Podium, that team is going to change depending on whether it's one block versus another or one goal versus another. So for example, if I am somebody who is, as an individual is really tackling weight loss, I'm tackling weight management, I'm working with my coach, I'm going to pull together a team of specialists that's a little, that includes weight management specialists, that includes a physician, that includes a personal trainer. And by the way, it's almost always going to include my partner, my spouse. If I have a partner or spouse in my life, they have to be there to support. Now, if my goal is to prevent a heart attack, my integrated support team is probably going to look different. I don't need the weight management expert necessarily. I might need, help from a registered dietitian in addition to my physician and again, my personal support network. If my goal is better work-life balance, if that's the way that, wellness is going to really manifest itself for me, again, the support team is going to be a little bit different. Maybe this is about involving a psychologist. And instead of having, my friend on the support team, I have a mentor at work. I have somebody that I'm working alongside, like a manager or a coach. So the question here is, once the block is identified, it really is working with a coach or somebody you trust to say, okay, before we get to the how, before we get to the really tactical stuff around what am I going to go and do, let's think about who are people that need to be here in this journey along with me. Because that I can't have a conversation with my partner about how to adapt our cooking, working with a personal trainer is probably not going to be the thing that I really need, right? I need the support of my spouse, I need the support of my kids, and I need the support of a coach who can help me think about how am I going to have that conversation in a way that's actually going to be productive with that person. So we really want to be thinking about for these individuals, for people who are trying to make these health changes and achieve their wellness goals, what is that team really going to look like? Now, you'll notice that in the center of all of these integrated support teams is this partnership between an individual and a coach. And so, I want to talk or close before we move to questions around what is the role of a coach as we move through this process. And there really are a few things that exceptional coaches do. And the first is they're going to act as a key partner in the diagnosis phase. Because during the diagnosis phase, you really need somebody to be working with who is bringing data to the table, whether it's through the TAIS assessment or another assessment, and saying, here are a few things that are going to help you get better in touch with what might be blocking you as an individual, but also in supporting you and having external discussions that you might need to have, right? How are you going to approach your manager? How are you going to approach your spouse? Because one of the things that we've found is you go back to that block of I'm worried I can't get my workouts in without stealing time from my kids and my family. Very often, if we coach an individual to go and have a conversation with their partner or have a conversation with the kids, what they will find out is actually their partner or their kids would love if they would take 60 minutes a week to focus on their health. And in fact, it's really a perceptual issue that they'd be stealing time from the family. The reality is the family would wholeheartedly support them, would actually go out with them, go for a bike ride, go for a run. So having those discussions is where a coach can play a really strong role in saying, how do you prepare for that discussion and how do you do it in a way that's going to be productive? So key partner in the diagnostic phase. The second is really good coaches are focused on building self-responsibility and self-awareness. Good coaching is not about telling people what to do, because that doesn't work. People don't act on things that people tell them to do. They act on things that they have self-discovered and become self-responsible for taking action. The best example I have of this from my own experience is tennis. As a kid, I played a ton of tennis. In high school, I was on a tennis court 10 to 12 hours a week. And one of the things that you hear over and over again in tennis is watch the ball, right? Watch the ball. And as a 15-year-old, I can tell you this is unbelievably frustrating, because you are sitting out there and you're going like, there is nothing else on this court other than a ball, right? There is nothing else I could be watching out here. It's just a ball going back and forth across the net, right? So it doesn't really have much of an impact. I had the pleasure, however, a number of years later, to actually get coached by somebody who really understood what coaching was about. And they had read a book by Tim Gallwey called The Inner Game of Tennis, which is a great book. It really revolutionized the way people taught the game. And what this coach did was, instead of the command, watch the ball, they would ask questions about the ball. So we would say, okay, I'm going to hit 5 balls. At the moment that you make contact with each of these balls, I want you to answer the question, how high was the ball when it came over the net? So we would hit a few balls, right? And I would shout it out. Say, okay, I'm going to hit another 5 balls. This time, at the moment your racket makes contact with the ball, I want you to answer the question, what way is the ball spinning when it hits the ground, right? Is it spinning forward? We call that top spin. Is it spinning backwards? We call that slice. Then he would say, okay, I'm going to hit another 5 balls. We've got 2 brands here. We've got Dunlops and we've got Slazengers. Dunlop's got a D on it. Slazenger has a cat on it. All right, at the moment you make contact with the ball, I want you to yell out, what is the brand of the ball that you're hitting? Now, what do I have to do in order to answer all of these questions? I got to watch the ball, right? I got to watch the ball in a way that I have never watched a tennis ball in my life. And of course, guess what I discovered? I actually wasn't watching the ball. I couldn't answer the questions a lot of the time, right? I had been getting accurate information, accurate feedback for years, but it had no impact on my behavior. It wasn't until I actually self-discovered, became fully self-aware of the fact that this was an issue, that I am able to direct my performance. And so really good coaches are able to use exceptional questions, are able to trigger introspectiveness and self-discovery in a way that promotes behavior change. But this doesn't mean that all good coaches do is ask questions and then listen. They also challenge assumptions. And I would say that is the difference between a good coach and a great coach. Good coaches are really good at using questions to help people self-discover. Great coaches know when to turn the corner and say, is that really true? Is what you told me really true? Because here's how I see it from my desk. And in particular, when we come back to those barriers around the stories people are telling themselves, around what their family expects, what their manager expects, a coach can play a really kind of reality check role of saying, are you sure that's true? And have you actually had that conversation with that person? Because you might be being blocked by a perception as opposed to what's really going on. And then, of course, once we get through all of that great diagnostic work, challenging assumptions, then just like the diagrams we looked at, the coach helps the individual assemble the people that they're going to need to make the change, right? Connect to resources, provide support, and then they are there to relentlessly focus on next step, next step, next step. Coaching is incredibly action-oriented. It says, okay, we've got the diagnosis, we think we know the barriers, we've got the team together, what are you going to do this week? And how are we going to know if you're successful? So that's a whirlwind tour, but the 2 things that I would say to summarize are really don't shortchange the diagnostic phase. Really make sure that people are getting in touch with what is really blocking them from making this change before we move to solutions. And then second, don't underestimate the power of the who, right? Getting the right people involved as relates to the goal and the barrier that exists for folks. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it back over to you guys, and hopefully we'll answer a few questions.
Thank you so much, Dane. That is, we have so much to respond to, and we do already have a few questions. Just a reminder, you can submit your questions anonymously in the chat box at the bottom left of your screen, and Dane will address a few of them in the time we have remaining. Just before that, I'm going to speak to Medcan Coaching. So Medcan Coaching, as Dane spoke to, is an integral component of the corporate performance plan here at Medcan, designed to help your top talent reach better health outcomes. Now, it removes obstacles towards making healthy behavior improvements and cementing change. And Performance Coaching is the partner organization with Medcan Coaching. A Medcan coach will work with your executive to develop a unique, data-driven profile of what motivates them and create an action plan that plays to their strengths. A coach is the partner that brings objective perspective, support, and accountability to turn information into sustainable action. The plan also includes the annual assessment and year-round care, or call the number on your screen, and also email coaching@medcan.com. So now we are going to turn to some questions. The slides will be made available at medcan.com under Medcan Insights. That will be within the next week, early next week actually. You'll be able to see this entire presentation online. So our first question, Dane, are you ready?
I am.
So this is, when does it make sense between using a coach and a personal trainer? And I think you did address this, but perhaps we could just go through that again, just accentuating the importance of having someone speak to the obstacles versus the action.
Yeah. I think it really makes sense to use a coach if you are in a situation, well, one of two situations. The first trigger that we certainly look for, and this is one of the things that we've worked a lot with Medcan on, is if every year the person is coming for their annual assessment and they are hearing the same information, they say, every year I hear I need to lose weight, or every year I hear I need to get more active, and they have the information, but they're still not making a change, that's where I think a coach can add really significant value, because they can help them move through that diagnostic phase to say, okay, you clearly want to do this and something is blocking you. So let's really get serious about finding out what that is so that we can take action. The second time I think a coach would be uniquely valuable is if you have questions around whether training or personal training is necessarily the kind of right center point for your integrated support team. So if the issue that you're dealing with is more wellness than fitness oriented, so it's more about work-life balance, or it's more about how do I take some of the issues that are conflicting between family and work, and how do I think about my life as an integrated system. Personal trainers can be a huge asset and obviously are an integral component of a whole bunch of different integrated support teams. But if you're not really sure exactly who should be on your team, I think a coach is a better place to start than a personal trainer. So those would be my two kind of situational things.
And I would imagine you're also, as you mentioned, how to speak to those people in a way that would lead to solutions and improved relations. Yeah, so you've spoken about how information doesn't change people, and motivation to learn versus motivation to transfer.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question is more about the organizational setting. So how would one scale something like this, I guess having a coach, into an organizational setting?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because you may look at this process and go, okay, I get it, this makes sense, and it seems very personalized and quite labor intensive to go through this process with each individual in the organization. And I guess my read on this is not necessarily something we want to deploy to every single person in the company. Where this has benefit is if you have those individuals who are showing a motivation to make change, they have a readiness to change, and the kind of easier broadly applied solutions like, giving everybody a Fitbit and putting the leaderboard up, or providing them with health information, or, telephone sessions with a CanFit Pro certified pro or something like that, those haven't moved the needle for them. That's when you would say, I think this is an individual who would be a good target for a little bit more of a personalized approach. And that's really the folks that we're talking about when we talk about this. Now, I will say you can do this in a lower touch, less intensive way, using folks who are already in the organization as peer coaches for these people, which is certainly one way to think about scaling this. Of course, and I probably have some bias here, there is no substitute for a professional coach who does this for a living, but certainly that is one way to think about kind of an interim step between a really low touch model and a more intensive high touch model.
Okay, thank you, Dane. So the next question, you actually just touched a bit on it. So this person is in human resources, and they want to know, A, how to identify someone, and also how to best approach someone who they think would benefit from coaching, but how to possibly sell it to them or get them on board.
Yeah, I think, this is one of the places where having one foot in the elite sport world really helps, I think, us as an organization. I think in most pockets of organizations, the vision of coaching has changed from it's a remedial thing that happens to people who aren't performing effectively, to this is a partner that can kind of help you move to the next level. But if you are talking to an individual who has more of the kind of former view that, coaching is for people that are having performance issues or people that are kind of in need of assistance, the thing I always point to is, show me an elite athlete that doesn't have a coach. Right? These people are not partnering with coaches because they're not good at what they do. They're partnering, with coaches because they want to be the best at what they do. They're partnering with coaches because it's very hard to improve in a vacuum, right? You need somebody to hold up that mirror to provide you with accurate feedback, to guide you through the discussions that need to happen. So, I certainly think this is one place where the world of sport can provide a nice analogy for people to say, this isn't about remedial stuff. This isn't about fixing weakness. This is about how are you going to move that next step.
All right, so we're wrapping up. So if anyone has any final questions, it would be the time to submit it now. Our last question is regarding the moving from that stage. You mentioned the staying left of the butt.
Yep.
And they mentioned that they have events in their office like lunch and learns, but it's just not progressing to the action. So you have mentioned this, but maybe anything else, as we wrap up, how you can make that transfer from info to action.
I guess for me, it comes back to self-responsibility. And, information is interesting to people. Self-responsibility is what drives action. And so when we talk to people, we are much less likely to help them get over that barrier than we actually inquire of people. We get inside what is really going on for them and what are the things that are causing them. There's a really old joke that that I still like. It's kind of corny, about getting over the barrier. And it's a joke about an old man who prayed every night. And every night he prayed, dear God, please let me win the lottery. Please let me win the lottery. And finally, after a week, God couldn't take it anymore and said, do me a favor, buy a ticket, right? Buy a ticket. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about getting over this barrier. Individuals have to buy their own ticket. We can't make somebody change their behavior. All we can do is create the conditions where people are likely to change their behavior, to make the choice that they need to make. And the way we create those conditions, again, is not by talking at people. It's by engaging them in understanding what is it going to take, what's blocking them, and what needs to change.
Well, thank you very much. This concludes our seminar today. That was Dane Jensen, CEO of Performance Coaching, the partner organization with Medcan Coaching. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.